start recording my just catching up with you so we can have uh some opening conversation chatter.
Yeah.
I've been slowly working through my YouTube playlist that I have that is just a bunch of video essays that I like have been saving video essays for like over a year now of just being like, "Oh, I should watch that because I think I would enjoy that." And then I'm like only just now getting to them and they're like so no longer relevant, but I'm like, this is such a good point. Like I just watched a video essay on First Kill, um, and it's relevant to this podcast because it was talking about whether First Kill was camp or not. And it was a really good video essay where I was like, damn, yeah, First Kill was kind of bad. Like I enjoyed it when it was coming out, but like it was a really brutal video essay. It was from Fairly Bitchy. Um,
Hit or miss to me.
that video essayist or First
Yeah.
Kill. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was a good video essay because it basically like it wasn't the entire point, but one of the points was basically like distinguishing between camp and kitsch. Um and it was a helpful reminder that like not everything that is bad that you enjoy is camp because some things aren't actually stylistic or like making interesting choices. Sometimes things are just telling you, "Hey, we're making this is you should feel good about this show when you're watching this show." And then it's like, "Okay, but what is the show actually doing?
Yeah.
Is it doing anything interesting?"
I feel like Kitsch is more object oriented and also more sentimental.
Yeah. It it was the quote like was something along the lines of I can't remember who the quote was from, but it was talking about like kitsch is saying there's like the two phases of kitsch where it's like look at kids frolicking in the field. Isn't it nice to see kids frolicking in the field? Like that's like the thing. It's basically like, oh, this is isn't this sweet? Isn't it nice that this is so sweet? Like that's kind of kitsch and this like sentimentality of like, isn't it doesn't it feel so good to be like seeing this thing? Meanwhile, I think camp is like it's trash. Camp is
It also offers
filth.
many more questions and ideas other than, isn't this nice?
Yeah. And it's also usually the work itself isn't going, isn't this nice? It's the people going, it's like, oh, I'm finding that this is an interesting thing that I want to discuss. Like, usually,
Yeah.
like, sometimes a camp piece of media is like, oh, I want you to feel this specific way, but it becomes camp when people take it and go, no, I'm actually going to feel and think these different emotions about it. Meanwhile, if a piece of media is like, you should feel this specific way, and the audience is like, yeah, I feel this specific way, that's not really camp. But this also gets to my point that I still strongly believe that the Nicole Kidman AMC intro is camp because I think it's like, we should feel nice about the movie theaters. Isn't it so wonderful? But it's like, so the actual visuals of it are so out of touch that you're just like,
Nicole's sitting there watching Jurassic World.
yeah. And like the opening shot of her in this like beautiful high heels walking through the rain. Like
In the puddle.
yeah. And it's
And
so
she's
like
alone in that theater. And
and
she's watching Jurassic World like it's the best film ever made.
well, in the lines of dialogue too, you know, like somehow heartbreak feels good in a place like this. Like it's like you're supposed to have this awe and reverence for the movie theaters, which is like, yes, I actually do have that about the movie theaters, but what is actually being shown as the examples of the movies that she's watching aren't those kinds of movies. And so that's where this like disconnect comes from, that you have to laugh at, and you kind of are, you're like rejecting this idea that they're trying to tell you, but still also like enjoying the whole artifice of it all. Anyway, this is, you agree with me. I just
Yeah. If
I
anything, the AMC ad is about how great Nicole Kidman is, not
yeah.
about how great movies are.
Yeah. It just, I'm still miffed that I was trying to tell someone that it was camp and they were just like, no, it's not, and they wouldn't even listen to me, and I'm like, I have a podcast on camp, like, I know what I'm talking about,
Having a
like,
podcast makes us an authority.
I mean, I feel like it doesn't make cis white men an authority. Cishet white men who have podcasts aren't authorities, but queer ladies who have podcasts, that, yeah, we're authorities.
They're allies.
um hey, speaking of camp icons, today we're discussing a true like, how do you put this? This film's like,
Arguably one of the foundational texts of how we currently envision camp. Also,
yeah.
this one's gonna be interesting because I like rewatched this movie like 2 weeks ago
Oh
when
yeah.
we originally thought we were going to record this. So I've been like reading the Wikipedia summary and watching a few clips.
Well, I just finished watching it. Also, I feel like I was wondering if this should be our cold open, but then I was like, no, I want to talk about First Kill. But yeah, the reason it took 2 weeks for us to actually, like, we had to reschedule multiple times is because I am without gallbladder now. Um but that's here nor there. Thankfully, I didn't have to be tended to by my um emotionally disturbed soul sister while I was um
You are not in a wheelchair.
I'm
You are
not in a
not
wheelchair.
stuck in the second floor of a house that does not have an elevator or accessible aids or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. You've done all the research for this film too, right?
Yes,
Cuz
because this is one of the films in my undergrad independent study.
yeah. I I'm going to say, so I just watched this movie. I really know so little about the context of it, other than I know that it's like kind of like infamous, right? I mean, I know that like the two leads had beef, like they didn't get along.
Allegedly.
Okay. And I knew that it was
It's like
about,
not super supported by
oh.
sources.
So wait,
There's a whole Be Kind Rewind video
where's
about it.
like the legend that they hated each other? Where did that come from? Marketing? Because like that's also the
Marketing,
plot of the movie.
publicity, but like it started decades before that.
Oh.
The
Okay.
rumors.
Give
But
me
if there was
context.
beef, it kind of started with the like awards season for this movie.
Oh. Okay. Um so
Have we said what movie we're talking
well,
about?
I don't know if we have.
So, This episode is about the classic Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962, starring Joan Crawford, who we've kind of covered before with
We've
Mommy Dearest.
we've covered Faye
And
Dunaway's performance as Joan
yes,
Crawford.
and Bette Davis as the titular role.
And Bette Davis and Joan Crawford are both like classic Hollywood stars, right? Like,
Yeah, contemporaries worked in the same studio for at least a significant amount of time.
oh, what studios were they attached? What
I
studio were
know
they
this
attached
one
to?
is Warner Brothers.
Okay. But they were mostly like they were getting work in like the 30s and 40s, and this came out in the 60s.
Yes.
So had they both like were they both like kind
I
of like
think All
out of
About Eve was either late 40s or early 50s, but that's Bette Davis.
yeah.
Like that's one of her big movies.
Because the premise of the plot of whatever happened to Baby Jane is that it's these kind of like washed up Hollywood stars, or well, one of them, they're sisters,
They're
Jane.
washed up in different ways.
Yeah, because Jane was a child star of like the stage, um, and then was not a good movie star, and Blanche was a successful movie star, but then had this accident happen where she was paralyzed, and so then
Accident in quotations.
yes, so they both don't they aren't working anymore, and like, but I find it really interesting that the plot is that people are recognizing Blanche again because of television, because her movies are playing on television. It's like a tiny little detail that I was like, oh,
The
that
plot is
is,
about reruns of movies on TV.
yeah. I'm like, that's such like a specific kind of like the way this movie is like situated in like Hollywood history is so interesting to me, because like it's set in the 60s. It's like set in present day. The title card is yesterday, which is so interesting now because it's like clearly not like recent past when we're watching it in the, 2000s, 2020s.
2020s.
I was
It's
like,
been
what's
20 years
this?
since the 2000.
um but yeah, I don't know, just I love television, and like how television like history, like the popularization of television changes different things, and I find
Also,
that,
the girl playing the neighbor is Bette Davis's daughter.
oh, cool. um but so okay, but what is, I mean, so what is that plot actually about, like?
It's about baby Jane Hudson, played by Bette Davis, who is in her middle age, but is still very much stuck in childhood in the way she
Yeah.
dresses and has her hair, and the insane pale makeup that Bette Davis applied herself
Oh my God.
and like allegedly
Wait.
never washed it off.
What? I was gonna say she looks like a clown. And I say that as like,
She's giving porcelain doll, like the little life-size baby Jane doll that they
like
were selling.
I understand why, like I'm as far as I understand that this is like a really like like this was part of like drag culture too, like lip
Yeah.
syncing to this scenes from
They
this
did a
this
whole skit on RuPaul based on this
but
movie.
like it's even like, is it even it was popular with like drag performers like
Yeah.
even before that too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I understand why, because it's almost drag. Like the Betty Davis's makeup is almost
Betty
drag
Davis
makeup.
is drag, and Joan has props, aka the wheelchair.
Yeah.
And so basically, baby Jane is taking care of her sister Blanche, who's in a wheelchair and in the second floor of their home. And baby Jane like starts getting like comments from the neighbors being like, hey, your sister's movies are on the TV, and like there's an influx of fan mail to Blanche, and that kind of sets Jane off alongside of Blanche planning on selling the house that they've always lived in. And
There
it
is
cascades from there.
this is a movie with so much established in expositional dialogue. Um it's very heavy-handed. Like everything about this movie. I mean, like Blanche, one of the first things we learn about her is that she has a bird in a cage. Like the metaphor couldn't be more obvious, especially considering all of the windows are have these big bars across them. I saw like on Google and stuff that this is categorized as a horror film, like a psychological horror film. But I the plot is like unnerving in theory, like because basically Blanche ends up becoming prisoner to her sister, who is, like she's tied Blanche up and
She's feeding her the bird, and then,
a
do you know there's rats in the cellar?
yeah, like it just starts starving her by feeding her things that Blanche is not going to eat, and then just stops feeding her, and then
You didn't eat your din.
um and yeah, then she like kills their maid, and she's like supposed is she's the villain, but she's also the protagonist because we're
By
also
the
like,
end, you learn that they're both villains and
yeah,
they're both victims of each other.
yeah. Um, I haven't written my letterbox review yet, but I think what it's gonna be is just Hey Siri, play Codependency by Orla Gartland, because Jesus Christ, these two are like so toxically codependent. Like especially Jane to Blanche, like does not like, she hates her, but also is like, they can't take me away from you, like we can't be separated, like tell me what to do, I love you
Without
so much.
Blanche, she'd like be moved into a home.
Yeah, which also like, I don't know, the way this, I mean it's from the 60s, the way this movie like approaches disability is better than I expected, but also it's still kind of like, okay, what do you mean that like Blanche is sick? They're just like, or no, not Blanche, that Jane is sick. I think what also trips me up about this is that the two characters and the two actors both have names that start with B and J, but it's flipped.
Oh yeah.
Um, but yeah, they're just like, oh, Jane's getting sick. She keeps getting sicker, and she's an alcoholic. She clearly has a lot of like trauma from being this child star, and kind of like has some age regression and stuff.
They're both stuck at the time when they were at their prime in their careers.
Yeah. Oh, whoa, that's such a good way to put it because yeah, Jane was at her prime when she was a child. And then Blanche was a this star in her like 20s or 30s, I guess. But
And just
Blanche,
like signing autographs from fans now watching the reruns of those movies.
yeah. Blanche is a wild character because
There's this like portrait of Blanche from the 1930s, like hanging
yeah.
right above her bed.
Also, I was going to ask, what did they like use footage from like previous films that
Yes.
Joan Crawford was in and
Yes.
Betty Davis was in for like the like I was wondering like I mean clearly this is a movie that is relying a lot of audiences connotations with the stars themselves to like add to the themes of the plot,
Yeah.
right?
I feel like now's a good time for me to read out all of the what I wrote
Yes,
for
please.
my independent study. So I have Whatever Happened to Baby Jane as part of the glamour and deterioration section of
Mm.
camp.
Mm-hmm.
And so my little thing about the film before I go into the additional source is this film is about the tumultuous, troubled relationship between titular character Jane, portrayed by Bette Davis, and her sister Blanche, played by Joan Crawford. Both are aging former Hollywood actresses whose ebb and flow of each woman's career informs their current living situation, as Blanche has spent years being cared for by Jane following a debilitating car accident. When presented with the knowledge that people are still watching Blanche's work, Jane spirals into performing a theatrical torture of her sister and has delusional wishes of reviving her child star act. Even though the film's second lead is performed by camp legend Joan Crawford, the film's camp comes predominantly from Bette Davis's Jane, as she is the more visibly performative and emotionally messed up of the two. And the script is frankly gives her more work to do, more work with than Joan. Jane's performance of her childhood self brings her both joy and pain as she lives her life in little girl makeup and hair dye and ringlets. She keeps a vintage doll version of who she used to be and eventually dons a replica of the Philly stage outfit she wore as a child. Most camp of all is Jane's performance and appearance of childhood while torturing Blanche. The elderly woman child has fed her birds and rats, confiscated all forms of communication to the outside world, and has her tied up and gagged on a bed. When Blanche pleads for sympathy, Jane responds with a happy, defiant, "But you are Blanche," that cuts at both Blanche and the viewer. A camp aspect of the overall narrative and journey of the film is awareness of its lead actresses as real life Hollywood glamour girls who are past their heyday, as the film utilizes actual footage of Betty and Joan's older films as part of Jane and Blanche's end story place in Hollywood. It is also very camp of the film to position both women as devious in some way and never explicitly urges the viewer to take sides with one or the other, since by the end it is revealed that it was Blanche who wanted to crash her car onto Jane. No one here is positioned as a pure being, and the film is all the better and more camp for it.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I want to say now, real quick before you also mention some other sources, is that I I knew that this film was about like two women who were age star, older washed up stars who hated each other, and that was kind of the legend around the actresses themselves. I thought that it was Jane who was disabled and Blanche taking care of her. Like that's what I thought in my brain. Like I didn't really know the plot. And so when I also started the movie, like little Blanche has this like angry stare.
There's a vibe.
And I was like, "Oh, yeah, she like hates that her sister has all this fame and is going to try to destroy her and then is going to be like kind of like,
In
you
her
know,
blunt, stiff bangs.
so I thought it was going to kind of be like a Munchausen's by proxy plot, like taking care of her to kind of get all the fame that she didn't have. But then I was like, oh wait, now we're having this time skip, and actually Blanche is famous and now, and Jane is upset. So, but the car crash accident, whatever, is shot very vaguely. So it isn't a surprise when
And then
like,
the little doll falls out of the car and its
oh
head
my
is
god.
open, and from there the titles come out.
The that is my favorite part of the film in terms of like it's so stylish. That title, that opening sequence, gorgeous. It happens so suddenly, but I love it. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with the Jane doll. It's so creepy and weird, and yeah. They're both kind of fucked up and morally dubious. Even though the whole film Blanche is like seems so sweet and so naive, she ends up admitting, "Yeah, I wanted to kill you."
And
And
then
then
she framed her.
yeah.
Jane, I'm dying. There's no time. You must listen. I made you waste your whole life thinking you'd crippled me. Please stop. You didn't do it, Jane. I did it myself. Don't you understand? I crippled myself. You weren't driving that night. You weren't driving. You were too drunk. I wouldn't let you drive. I made you go open the gates. I watched you get out of the car. You'd been so cruel to me at the party, imitating me, making people laugh at me. I watched you get out of the car. I wanted to run you down, crush you. But you saw the car coming. I hit the gates. I snapped my spine. What do you mean? All this time we could have been friends.
What have people said about this film? Like what's
Kind of
kind of
started a whole subgenre.
oh.
Um, it kind of has two names. It's called, it can be called either hagsploitation or psychobiddy, and they're all like
Oh.
horror movies or thrillers about an older woman wreaking havoc,
Oh.
mostly starring, similar to Joan and Bette, aging Hollywood actresses that were kind of had dropped off from Hollywood because they were aging, and we're given like a sort of second life through these roles. And it's also like I feel like I prefer the term hagsploitation to psychopathy,
Yeah. Also,
partly because it kind of is exploitative in the sense that like this is the one job that these older actresses could get at this point in Hollywood. But also these are good roles.
yeah.
Like older women, at least not nowadays, they don't get meaty roles like this.
Well, I was gonna say, I feel like I've heard the term hagsploitation in terms of X, but like
Yes.
that's a film where it's not an older actress playing this older woman. It's Mia Goth and like
Yeah.
so much makeup. And so is
It's a
it
form of
even
commentary of exploitation, and
yeah.
it can be argued that it is camping exploitation because
Mm,
it's just Mia Goth in old age makeup.
yeah. I will say I don't know. This might be sacrilegious, but also it might be exactly the point. I don't know if Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is a good movie.
It's
Like,
good. Well, and most of it is good. I'm not sure how I feel about the whole Edwin subplot.
I that makes sense to me. I think cuz to me, honestly, this is a movie about like the biggest theme that stood out to me is like surviving in Hollywood, you know? But that's what I mean where I'm like I'm not sure if this is a good movie or not in that like Betty Davis is phenomenal. Like I'm obsessed. I love the way she shuffles
I'm pretty sure she
around.
was nominated for an Academy Award, but lost to Anne Bancroft, who was unable to attend. And before the Oscars happened, Joan made like agreements with various actresses, including Anne Bancroft. At least I think it was Anne Bancroft who won that award. But yeah, basically saying like if you can't come, I can receive the award for you.
Oh shit.
And that is arguably where the beef actually started, if there ever was one. It
Oh
was in that year's Academy
damn.
Awards.
Damn. The thing about this movie, I'm like, is how much of it is deliberate and how much of it is naive camp?
Think it's a blend of both because according to the Be Kind Rewind video, it was Joan who read the source material. It's based on a novel and
Mm.
offered and like proposed to Betty like, hey, this could be really fun to do together and kind of lean in on the rivalry narrative.
Interesting. Yeah. It feels like it's so
But
over the top.
I think the naivete comes from the way the characters resemble the actors, in the
Mm.
sense of like patterns in which the actors had like established in the roles. Like for example, Betty Davis is like infamously not afraid to look kooky and
Mm.
have weird unlikable roles. Meanwhile, Joan Crawford is was very much focused on a sense of relatability to the audience and looking like a leading lady. And like
Yeah.
Blanche is the more presentable of the two. She is at first the likable victim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Apparently
It's
Joan insisted on like wearing padding for the beach scene so she wouldn't look flat.
that's fascinating. Um I just yeah, I don't know. I feel like this film is the performances is what makes this movie work. Because besides the
Also, the
opening,
lines. There are some really good lines that I've already quoted.
yeah. Yeah, but I also am like, how would those lines be as iconic as they were if they were delivered, if they weren't delivered in the way they were delivered?
Probably not. Joan and Betty are like iconic actresses for a reason.
I think the thing to me that is interesting is that it's like, I don't know, it's just not as aesthetically interesting as some other stuff that we've seen. And like
I
to
would kind of counter that before we go into the additional source
okay, yeah.
part. But one of the things that I like about this movie is that it kind of proposes a California LA Gothic vibe to it.
Oh.
Like it's very much a Gothic film in many ways, but it's also like clearly California, sunny. There's like some surf rock inspired music here
The
and
music
there.
is wild. There are some wild music choices. You know what? Actually, I get your point. I think
And it
it's
the California Gothic also like really lends itself to this film's like weird relationship with time period. Because like
mm-hmm.
all of the Betty and Joan, Jane and Blanche stuff in the house is very like classical and old fashioned, but then all of a sudden you hear surf rock.
Yeah.
There's like again mid-century modern architecture and everyone outside of their little bubble in the house doesn't really seem to know who they are.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
beach, the two leads look completely different from everyone else in the beach.
Yeah.
It's in black and white, but it's also like it's very clearly like at the start of a new type of filmmaking in terms of the kind of subject matter that films were starting to cover at the time that were also like well funded.
Yeah. I guess I think as I wish that there was like more. That's sometimes just like a criticism that I have of stuff, especially like things that are camp, is that I sometimes just wish it was just like even more like there was more moments where we see this like stark difference of like, you know, how the sisters are out of place and kind of out of time. But I mean, I guess it is also true that like the horror and the tension and the conflict comes from this like claustrophobia of being trapped in the house. So like from a plot perspective, I guess it's also like it would be hard for there to be more scenes where you can see like how out of touch Jane is. And I mean, and the scenes that we do get are interesting. And um but
I
uh,
could listen to them yell at each other for hours.
I also I didn't fully defend the Edwin plot. I just want to say that like I think him and his mother are an interesting foil to, you know, people trying to make it in the entertainment industry. Um and there could
I
be
like the aspect of that plot of the sense of like trying to take advantage of baby Jane,
yeah.
and
But also
also like a sort of meta narrative sense of like how like you could argue that like hacksploitation takes advantage of older women who were desperate for work.
yeah. And I mean, I also find it just fascinating how no one no one really knows who Baby Jane is. And also it's so fascinating that she's always does it. She introduces herself as baby Jane. Like she is, it's not that someone is putting this identity of trying to of youthfulness onto her. Like she's still trying to cling to that. But I
She
like,
is the stage persona.
yeah, but I like that I don't know, I like seeing Edwin as this character, as the one guy who's like, "Oh, yes, I know who you are. Oh, yes, like you sing beautifully." Like um it's just another like it's, you know, we talk a lot about artifice and performance and people faking things, and like he's just another character that we get who's like a fake and putting on a performance of
Also,
really liking Jane.
there's something so materialistic and also both like old fashioned but also modern about how the whole plot of the film is kind of started by your movies are playing on the TV.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I love that. I love that that's what's going on. It is like a little like, I mean, if we're trying to talk about like, you know, different eras in Hollywood and where this movie exists in it, but also the plot of it exists. You know, it's like, yeah, like having stuff rerun on television is this kind of this moment. It's an
Yeah.
interesting moment
And
in,
this film as a cult classic has probably been rerun a bunch of times, so it's kind of just repeating the whole cycle.
yeah. Yeah, it's so meta.
I just keep thinking about the rerun plot line and going Turner Classic Movies inciting incident.
Yeah.
There are a whole lot of things I remember. And you never paid for this house. Baby Jane Hudson made the money that paid for this house. That's who. You don't know what you're saying. Blanche, you aren't ever gonna sell this house. And you aren't ever gonna leave it. Either. Jane.
Jane, do you remember when I first came back after the accident?
You promised you wouldn't ever talk about that again.
I know I did. But I'm still in this chair. After all those years, I'm still in this chair. Doesn't that give you some kind of responsibility? Jane, I'm just trying to explain to you how things really are. You wouldn't be able to do these awful things to me if I weren't still in this chair.
But you are, Blanche. You are in that chair.
So what are the other sources you wanted to bring to this discussion?
So for my independent study, I cited this article called Bringing Out Baby Jane, Camp Sympathy and the 1960s Horror Woman's Film, written by David Grevin. And what I wrote is David Grevin's short text reads, "Whatever happened to Baby Jane," as the starting point of the Horror Woman's Film. Since the 1962 film merged thrilling horror with the conventions and themes explored in traditional old Hollywood women's films. He uses Janine Basinger's definition of the women's film, which is a film that places at the center of its universe a female who is trying to deal with emotional, social, and psychological problems that are specifically connected to the fact that she is a woman.
Mm.
Grevin posits that the horror woman's film simultaneously maintains attitudes of nostalgic references for its past iconography and figures, and holds bitter, ironic contempt. The simultaneous depiction of differing attitudes within a single text itself is camp, for it refuses to be put in a box by itself and by whoever is reading said text. Grevin also assesses the aforementioned Bette R. Blanche as camp because it turns these characters' tragedy into melodrama, and because Jane's indifference to her sister's suffering violates social propriety and the entire sentimental culture that has defined American constructions of femininity. The violation of feminine norms is what makes Jane's iconic line and Jane herself so camp.
Yeah. I there's a line that really stood out to me at the end where when Blanche is confessing that you know, she caused this accident. She was driving and she tried to run over Jane and then ended up hurting herself. But she says, like, I made you ugly, Jane. And I think that's so interesting because, like, ugly as this term, I don't think that's referring to just, like, you know, Jane's appearance. It's her personality.
It's the behavior.
Yeah. And yeah, these are unlikable women. Even though, you know, Blanche is this, like, sweet, you know, almost like naive seeming, like, perfect. She's a perfect victim, you know, so sympathetic. We find out, you know, that she's not in the end. But also, I was interested, I found her buzzer to be really obnoxious. And I thought that kind of, like, almost, I don't know if it's, like, an intentional aesthetic choice, but it's, like, interesting to, like, you know, to have her be, like, pounding on this buzzer that's making this really annoying sound. That's, like, you know, yes, it's, like, reasonable when she, like, you know, then Jane will come up and be like, she's like, well, I'm hungry, you know, it's like, you didn't give me breakfast, or it's like, well, who's here in the house, like, I want help, you know, like, she has these reasonable requests, but, like, the buzzer makes it so, like,
the ending recontextualizes it.
Yeah.
Also, I love the moment where I think it was after the rats in the cellar, where Blanche just starts doing donuts in her wheelchair.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Screaming.
Yeah. That moment is crazy. Well, Jane is, like, laughing maniacally.
And Blanche is just doing circles.
Yeah.
Also, the image of Blanche just laying there on the beach.
Yeah. It's
like fully covered, lying there on the sand, and Jane is next to her.
Yeah.
And, like, no one else sees how insane this looks.
I truly was trying to, like, understand why no one was, like, figured out they were at the beach sooner. And I was thinking, like, I think part of it might be the fact that it's, like, you know, no one recognizes them, like, even though they have this, like, you know, Blanche's, you know, movies are
no
on
one
rerunning,
recognizes them,
like,
but they also keep watching Jane when they realize that something's off with her.
That's true.
Like, at the very end, like, as the police are going to Blanche, everyone else at the beach is just kind of watching Jane in a circle as she, like, spins around and dances.
Well, she said that she, like, you know, she's like, you know, don't you remember when we went to the beach, you know, when we were younger, and, like, I would practice my dances and people would watch. Like, she's like, that ending is, like, I understand why it ends there, because it's an emotional arc. It's a conclusion for Jane, because she gets what she wanted, you know? She gets people to watch her and see her again. It's is it insane for me to say it's kind of similar to the ending of Female Trouble?
No, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
Although I feel like Divine's character might be a bit more lucid
Well, yes.
than Jane at this point. But
Yeah.
yeah, other than that, they're pretty similar.
Yeah.
I've written a letter to Daddy saying I love you.
Is there anything that you've read about, like, an analysis of the baby Jane doll specifically? Like, I feel like there's got to be something there about, like, commercialism and Hollywood and
It's like the commodification of this child, but also who Jane wishes she still was.
yeah.
It's the baby Jane that doesn't age.
Yeah.
Therefore, none of what has happened to baby Jane happens.
Mm. I mean, Jane's a really, I think she's like, at least her, you know, like, if you step back and think about her whole narrative, she's really a tragic character.
She's like an iconic villain for a reason.
She has this moment where she's like singing the I wrote Daddy a letter song.
I've written a letter to Daddy.
Yeah.
His address is heaven above.
She like steps into the light and sees her reflection and like freaks out. Like, she thinks of herself still as this like child, and so seeing her reflection of her older self is like really upsetting to her, and that's quite sad. But yeah, I mean, Bette Davis is like so big. Did I mention yet that she just shuffles around?
Oh yeah, her little walk.
And I don't know. Like, there weren't lines that stuck out to me, but definitely there were mannerisms and like movements that really were like in my head, like the way
wheelchair spinning.
Well, that, but of with Jane, I think I really like the way she like bit into the pork chop because you know she like brings Blanche her dead bird as a meal, so then Blanche doesn't even want to see what the next meal that Jane brings her is, and it ends up being pork chops, and she's like, look, it's fine, and is like eating this pork chop, like just like waving the bone around while she's talking.
Whenever she imitates Blanche.
That is wild.
It's actually just Joan's voice.
Well, I know. I assumed, but it's still like, that's just a crazy little character trait that they gave her, where she's just like has perfect mimicry and also like is good at forging signatures. Like, that's like,
he has all these pictures of Blanche all crossed out.
That's like high, like incredibly like peak manipulative behavior, is being able to mimic someone, both to like, you know, impersonate them to get what you want, but also to like mock them to their face, sounding like them. Like, that's
they're both like two of the all-time female manipulators.
Yeah. And it is also just like, it's iconic that they're these older women. And I like that.
And they're both kind of performing innocence in different ways. Like Baby Jane has her whole Baby Jane persona, but like as you said earlier, Blanche performs as the perfect victim.
I think it's definitely tricky to like navigate hagsploitation, as you said, to be like, we have these older female stars that the fact that they're these, they're older, and haven't, are kind of washed up, is like, we're exploiting that, but you're also giving them these roles, and they are getting these spotlights and these moments to be praised, and they're
Bette
like
was nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, and their age is like integral to the plot and the themes. But it is also like in some ways like a spectacle, and in some ways a mockery. So it's very complicated, I feel like.
And again, that's what makes it camp, because there's all these factors going into it.
Yeah.
In a way, it kind of forces audiences to confront like how they view older women and like how they're depicted in media.
Yeah. And also, I kind of, I think it's worth also to include in that interrogation and reflection, like how disabled actresses are treated too, or disabled people, because that also comes with age, that though in the case of this, if Blanche in the story, she had an accident and that's what caused her to be paralyzed, but it's like that. First of all, there's so much abuse that happens in retirement communities and elderly living spaces. Like, it's like American society does not treat our elderly people and also people with disabilities very well, and that's definitely in the case of Hollywood too, of who's getting roles and who's getting representation. And I'm not quite informed and like prepared enough to have an eloquent statement on it, but I appreciate that films and discussions of films like this can make me think about it.
Yeah, we should definitely cover the film Freaks at some point for the podcast.
Oh,
because it's kind of iconic for many different reasons, mostly pertaining to like disability representation and like casting people who are actually disabled. But it's also, at least at the time it was released, it was supposed to be a horror movie about how scary these people are. And so yeah, there's basically been a lot of like scholarly work on Freaks because of this whole dichotomy. Like the film itself is called Freaks.
yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth mentioning that the only real character who's a person of color is Elvira, who is like a maid and like a house cleaner, and she also is like, we don't see really her being killed, but she is violently killed, and is like body
Adds
is
to how old-timey the vibe of this movie is. But she's also like the only person that catches on what's going on in this house, and that's
that's
why
true.
she's killed.
That's true. But it's still she
Yeah.
deserves better.
Although I do
Um,
love the image of her body in Blanche's wheelchair, and Jane is like wheeling her out.
yeah.
That is everything that Jane does is kind of iconic.
I mean, it's just so it's cartoony
Yeah.
how evil she is and how
But she's
also
also like so
incompetent.
deeply complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like that's what camp is. It's like it's cartoony, but you could also take it apart in so many different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not over the makeup.
She also puts on this like voice, this like childlike voice
Yeah. Yeah.
that she
I
only like occasionally drops to be mean to Blanche.
yeah. I don't do you know like what are the scenes that are or lines that are like most iconic? Because I knew that this the like the premise of
Definitely,
this.
you mean after all this time we could have been friends.
Oh.
Like that's one of the more like famous lines from this movie, apart from the rest that I already quoted.
Mm. Because it's funny because this I know this movie is iconic, but I really like there weren't anything that really stood out to me. Like I feel like I've maybe heard like the names Blanche and like Baby Jane are familiar to me, but like there weren't any quotes that I was like, "Oh, I think I've heard people saying this before."
I before watching this movie years ago, I definitely knew about Butch R. Blanche and Din Din.
You know we got rats in the cellar?
One of the last notes I have left written down that I haven't mentioned is we mentioned like the weird music that comes in at certain times. I also think there's a moment of sound design that was like just another like absurd moment to me, which was when Blanche goes into Jane's room because she's like trying to find something to eat because she's starving, and there's like that's when she eventually finds that like Jane's like forging her signature and stuff, but she finds a bunch of chocolates and she's like eating them, and I
Oh
swear
yeah.
the mouth sounds are so loud.
Like
Like
that was ADR like crazy.
yeah.
Underrated insane moment from this film.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love when Jane just hands Edwin the baby Jane doll.
It's yeah. Wild. Truly that to me that is the most horror moment of like the doll is to me what is most horror about this movie.
Also, I love little Blanche's whole look and vibe.
Oh yeah, you said the like that those blunt bangs and just this like stare.
Like it's like sinister vibes.
Yeah. And their mom just like disappeared from the story. We don't know whatever happened to her.
We could assume that their parents are dead considering their age
Yeah.
and the state of things.
But like they talk about like, oh, daddy, like daddy got, you know, daddy bought this house for us and you know, oh, I
I mean,
miss
he was
daddy, but
a father in the early 1900s.
no, but I'm just saying like they don't care about their mom at all. Jane was a daddy's girl and that's it. Like
Also, the part where little Jane has the tantrum at stage door.
Oh my God. Another moment with like incredibly on the nose forced dialogue.
It was really giving child star. It was giving toddlers and tiaras. It was giving dance moms.
Yeah.
Like there's something like as I've said before, like this film is like weirdly specific in terms of the time it's set, but it's
Mm.
also showing like, yeah, child stars. We're not breaking any cycles.
Yeah. I feel like this is it's an interesting pairing to Mommy Dearest in a way. Which is obviously, this like somewhat fictionalized, somewhat biographical, not auto, but somewhat biographical depiction of um Joan Crawford. And it's just interesting because in this movie Joan Crawford is playing such like this like sweet but like
And that's
quietly
how she
sinister.
presented herself in real life.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like it's interesting because she is sinister. There is this like, toxicity that is underneath this like,
But like only
sweetness.
once you know the reveal.
Yeah.
And then
And
you get the vibe.
and so then that's interesting to then pair with, say, like Faye Dunaway's performance as Joan Crawford, which is very big.
It's giving Baby Jane.
Yeah. So it's I don't know, it's really it like having watched this movie, I feel like Mommy Dearest is even more camp now because I'm like, oh my God, that's.
I mean, it was the final stage of the campification of Joan Crawford. Because like pre-Baby Jane, she was like camp in the sense that she was like this fabulous Hollywood icon. But with Baby Jane, she was this fabulous Hollywood icon who was also playing this bedridden woman being tormented by Bette Davis, and
Yeah.
who dies just laying there on the beach.
Okay, is she actually dead?
I think so. She was at least on death's door.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
with Mommy Dearest, it was like Joan Crawford herself is kind of both the Hollywood icon and Blanche and also Baby Jane
Yeah.
in real life.
Yeah. It's like, oh, she's capable of doing these awful things to her family members. Or at least like, that's this story that is being told about Joan Crawford, at least. I mean, how did this like affect Bette Davis and Joan Crawford's career after it came out? Was it, I mean, like you said, like Bette Davis was nominated, but did they get more work, or was it just like momentarily
Joan
praised?
was also in other like exploitation movies after this. Like I feel like this film cemented them as like a specific type of old Hollywood icon.
Mm-hmm.
Because of how wild and camp this movie is. Like this movie helped them transcend into a space that not a lot of their contemporaries did. Because a lot of their contemporaries, I think, just stayed in the 50s in more traditional roles.
I think she gets talked about a lot, but I still think Bette Davis needs more praise for that performance, because she made the movie for me. she she made
like I said, she was the one who got nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah.
But the one with the picture with an Oscar is Joan Crawford. For that year.
Fascinating. I'm really surprised that I really thought this feud between Joan Crawford and Bette Davis was a bigger thing than it was. But I guess that's really not that's not really what's interesting to talk about this film.
The end and short of Big Kind Rewind's video is throughout their careers, they've just kind of been fundamentally different people and fundamentally different performers. And if there was a feud, it started with this film's award season.
Then why did Ryan Murphy make that TV show? Because he likes spectacle, I guess.
Yeah. Because Betty and Joan are just iconic. And this film is iconic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, what do we have here?
All for you.
Janie, isn't that a beautiful doll? Thank you, young man. That's a gorgeous doll. Folks, have you ever seen such a lovely doll?
Well, do we have any, like, final little wrap-ups to anything we want to say about this? Or are we leaving it on Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, this movie? It's iconic.
I feel like there should be so many Baby Jane fan cams. Where are the Baby Jane fan cams?
Yeah. Where are they? Good point. Because there's fan cams. We discussed the pirate, and there were fan cams of the pirate. But there should be fan cams of this movie. More fan cams of older movies.
Baby Jane, the character specifically.
Yes. I think we've come to an end.
Yeah, more Baby Jane fan cams.
I have been your co-host, Saffron Hefta-Gaub. You can follow me online everywhere at Gaub Hefta.
And I've been your other co-host, Fabiola. You can find me on Instagram at Fabi0LAHH and on Twitter at Fabiola_Liano.
Our theme song that you're bobbing your head to right now is by Harrison Lurie.
Give us a rating on Spotify and a review on Apple.
Thank you to our patrons, Nicole Veneto, Jose Liano, and Pericles Sparrow. Please check our episode description for additional links and citations.
Thank you so much.